Brilliant. We've got people still joining, and we're going to kick off now. So let's check it's recording. Yeah. Thank you everyone for joining us today on the 4th of December for the next in our Safety for All webinar series. Thank you for joining us on your lunch break and giving up your time to listen to us today. The webinar today is called Protecting Perioperative Practitioners, a deep dive into PPE standards for safety in the operating theatre. We are joined today by Dr. Ali Mehdi. Dr. Ali is a consultant trauma and orthopaedic surgeon and the medical director at Kent and Canterbury Hospitals. Dr. Mehdi has over 25 years of surgical experience as an educator for the University of Edinburgh's Global Health Academy and the Royal College of Surgeons. He's delivered training on safety standards globally, making him a knowledgeable voice on PPE in healthcare. Ali today is joined by a colleague of his, Edward Curtin, with extensive experience as the clinical theatre manager for East Kent Hospital's Day Surgery Unit and Orthopaedic Centre. Edward brings hands-on experience in managing operating room safety. His decade-long experience as a senior operating department practitioner provides him with deep insights into the importance of PPE in day-to-day surgical operations. The topics today we will be covering are the essential role of PPE in protecting healthcare workers and patients, differentiating PPE standards for various perioperative roles, the importance of high-quality PPE and the risks of variability in standards, best practices for PPE use to enhance safety in the operating theatre. And just before I hand over to Ali, I'd like to say that in planning this webinar, we would really like this to be an open discussion. I know a lot of people joining today are frontline healthcare staff and people who have experience of the topics we will be covering on a day-to-day basis. So please do put any questions in the chat, and once we finish the presentation, we will run through Q&A. Without further ado, I'll hand over to Ali.
Fantastic. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Josh, for your kind introduction. Just a slight correction. So I have been in trauma and orthopedics for the last 25 years, consultant for 17 years, and a medical educator, I would say, for 10 years, associated in the past with the Global Academy or Health Academy of the University of Edinburgh and the University of Edinburgh. But now in my current role, I'm medical director at Kent and Canterbury Hospital. And like you've pointed out, Josh, yes, involved with the non-technical skills for surgeons training program for the Royal College of Surgeons of Edinburgh. So I'd like to thank you all for your time. And I'd like to use this opportunity to present my reflections. These are non-organizational reflections and a non-expert view, because in amongst you might be the experts who have greater depth about this particular topic, and I would request that everybody contributes so that we can have a rich discussion, but also, as you will see through the reflections that Ed and I bring, some advocacy for the need for something on policy for PPE in surgery. So we will be discussing the role of PPE and how PPE safeguards healthcare workers and patients, what current best practice is, what the different standards are for different perioperative roles, but I suppose, a little bit of discussion on the individual context, whether it's the timing of PPE, the timing context, but also the context of different types of surgical procedures and different types of surgical activities, as you'll find will be part of the discussion. We'll be looking at how do we address the variability of PPE standards and impact on safety. And I think that's where this discussion is going to be very impactful. So I'll try not to go in the detail. This is not going to be, talking to you, any one of us, but it'll be touching upon areas of various bits of information. So what is the role of PPE? And Ed, over to you. So, sorry, I will come in here. So, my reflection is that PPE is for safety, and Ed will cover that. and through safety, reduces harm, not just for the patient, but also for the staff involved. Because I think, we could all say, and particularly as a surgeon, I can say that the second victim usually is the people involved in the care of a particular patient, particularly, a surgeon who suffers infection, a complication from an infection, a patient suffering an infection following surgery very much affects the psyche of a surgeon, affects confidence, and, the surgeon is a second victim, and people involved in the care are second victims. And we know very well that we've got a retention challenge with the NHS. We have regulations to meet, hence, PPE is important. We've got standards, but the financial impact, and I'll be talking about that as we go along. Ed, over to you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for inviting me along. So the first part is, what is the role of PPE and what is PPE? So the clues in the name, personal protective equipment, and it's an essential part of equipment we use every day, we take for granted in theatres. There's some bit of information background. From February 25th, 2020 to 2022 March, the NHS purchased 19.8 billion items of PPE. And this is a comparison to pre-COVID of 2.43 billion items of individual PPE. That's quite a dramatic increase in a short amount of time. And that will lead on to later on about quality and ethical sourcing, where we got this equipment from. Next one, please, Joe. Ali?
Yeah.
So why do we need PPE in theatres? First of all, is infection control. So there's two reasons is to prevent infection. One is the patient, and PPE minimises the risk of transmission infections from the care provider to the patient. And secondly, is to protect the staff. PPE shields the staff, the healthcare worker, from exposure to bloodborne pathogens like hepatitis, HIV, airborne microorganisms, and other contaminants. Second one is sterility maintenance. A lot of stuff we do in the operating theatre is a sterile environment, and the PPE we use comes in two forms: sterile and non-sterile. Sterile form will stop us causing infection or secondary infections to patients. The third part is protection from hazardous materials. Surgical procedures often involve exposure to body fluids, sharps, and instruments, and chemicals such as cleaning agents. PPE like gloves, masks, eye protection provides a necessary barrier between us and the patient. Minimising exposure to aerosols. Surgical masks and respirators reduce the inhalation of aerosols, which may carry pathogens, especially in a procedure like orthopedic surgery. When we're sawing bone, it's in the air, and this reduces the exposure to aerosol intake. Next one, Ali, please. So we're looking at the common PPE in theatres. So we start with the gloves. We have sterile and non-sterile gloves. We have two types. These must meet the BS-EN 455 standards. The Association for Perioperative Practice, APP, they recommend that in most procedures we should double glove, and that's we have an underglove and an overglove. The underglove tends to be a different colour, normally green. So if the outer glove becomes perforated, we will see it as a hole in the glove, and it reduces the risk of infection. Surgical masks. We tend to have the standard surgical mask in theatres, which is like a normal face mask. We don't very often use FFP unless we know it's a known risk of infected cases. It's estimated that the normal face mask is 80%, 87% effective to stopping airborne transmission of, say, blood or any other contamination onto the masks. Next one, Ali, please.
1 minute, Ed. I'll just move this.
Then we've got the respirator mask. This is the FFP1, 2, and 3. these respirators ensure appropriate protection and level against airborne particles. These are the ones that we predominantly used in COVID to try and reduce any airborne transmissions. The difference of these is for these to work effectively requires each person needs to be individually fitted to the correct type of mask, and each mask are different. So you have different providers. So if you're fitted for one, you might not necessarily fit another one. And they have a shorter shelf life, and they're more expensive. Then we've got gowns. Gowns are quite important. They come in varying types. So for orthopedics and urology, we have a stronger gown, which provides better protection for water resistance. But when we look at gowns, we look at barrier protection. So it must be liquid resistant. They must prevent penetration of blood, bodily fluids, and other liquids. It must be breathable and comfortable. We spend a lot of time in these gowns sometimes, varying between 1 hour and up to 7 or 8 hours. So they must be moisture vapor transmission. They must be moisture and vapor transmission, ensuring air permeability to keep the wearer comfortable for long surgeries. Also, they must be thermal regulated to prevent overheat and excessive sweating. You've got strength and durability. These tensile strengths are tested for fabrics under stress. So we're stretching, we're pulling, we're moving. They mustn't rip. They're tear resistant. They mustn't be, when you catch it, they mustn't rip. And there's seam strength. All these are tested wet and dry. Then we've got fluid absorbency, the hydrophobic properties. The outer layer must repel fluid to prevent saturation. Low lint. So like cotton, what we don't want is lint floating around in the theatre. So these gowns are tested to make sure there's limited shredding of particles in the air. Biocompatibility. These materials should not cause allergic reactions or skin irritations for the wearer or the person that we're operating on. And then we look at environmental impact. Reusable fabrics should maintain integrity after multiple washes and sterilisation. Disposable fabrics should be biodegradable or recyclable to reduce environmental footprint. Next one, Ali.
So now you'll see over here that there is a difference between PPE. You've got routine PPE and then enhanced PPE. Picture on the right of the screen, very familiar during COVID times where people wore face shields, FFP3 masks, and protective barriers. But now that we're past COVID, you'll see an enhanced PPE in the form of surgical gowns, hoods, or helmets, whatever you might want to call them. And I think it's particularly relevant over here. I did touch upon, the cost of finance. Now, there are approximately 250,000 orthopedic joint replacements done every year. The estimated risk of infection is in the region of 2%. And if you were to put a cost of between 50 to 100,000, depending on the complexity of the revision involved for that infected joint replacement, you'd be looking at an overall cost to the National Health Service of anywhere between 250 million to 500 billion. Now, earlier in the slide, again, I touched upon the well-being aspect about how a surgeon is potentially the second victim of a patient getting an infection after surgery. Now, putting aside the surgeon, the overall sickness absenteeism in the NHS is again a massive cost. You're looking at 1.7 billion. So hence, there's that financial impact and therefore the need for PPE at the very core, particularly of extremely highly sterile procedures such as orthopedics. In fact, these exhaust gowns worn by orthopedic surgeons have been shown to reduce particulate contamination down to 328 in these exhaust suits and hoods or helmets versus 1178 particles if standard surgical gown and face mask was worn in a laminar flow environment. So yes, it is an added cost to an organization, but it reduces massive costs by minimizing infection. I mean, surgical hoods and gowns are shown to reduce infection by approximately 90%. Now, there's best practice in the form of standard infection control precautions through the National Infection Prevention and Control Manual. So I will put that link into the chat box when we get into the discussion phase of this webinar. But again, there are individual roles and responsibilities that organizations and key individuals such as chief operating officers, directors of infection prevention control, managers and employees of all services, the staff providing treatment, all of them must comply, all of them must engage with this guidance. Now, this guidance actually also goes into some granularity in its appendixes, talking about the different types of PPE, particularly for aerosol generating procedures. So what was interesting was, although we have guidance, is there a policy? Is there a policy? And are there common standards? And I could not find any common standards. I mean, there is a WHO document on PPE for COVID-19, but nothing specifically for surgery. Now, why should there be something for surgery? Now, it is estimated that surgical harm occurs in approximately 5 to 10% of procedures in the developed world, but possibly up to 30% in low and middle income countries. And of that, you're looking at infection being a fairly major proportion. So again, I mean, in developed countries, the risk of infection is somewhere between 2 to 5%, depending on the type of procedures being done. But in low and middle income countries, that risk rises to 10 to 30%, depending on the setting. And I suppose the issue that we have to understand is that it's not about who addresses the variability in PPE, but perhaps this is an opportunity for advocacy for the WHO to address that variability in PPE in different settings and different times. When you talk about different settings and different timing, I mean when there is, say, a pandemic. We've been through it in very fresh living memory, where the need for PPE increases in the surgical setting, especially for aerosol generating procedures, but also in the context of surgical demand, because we know in the elective recovery, at this point in time, surgical demand has risen due to a backlog of surgery. So that really, I would say, is a good reason to advocate to the WHO to set that global standard. There is some guidance there from the Association of Perioperative Practitioners, but it's not translated into policy with a mandate. So really speaking, we do need to employ human factors now into managing this variability in PPE. Now, human factors is not just about examining what the technical factors are for making PPE available, but also non-technical factors. So what are the non-technical factors? Non-technical factors are staff education. So when you have staff education, what I mean is, is everybody educated to understand the importance of using PPE? Are people double gloving? I mean, we've got fairly high standards in the NHS, I know that. But, if we were to reach out widely, do people know the importance of double gloving for procedures that involve sharp injuries? So it's estimated that there are 385,000 needle stick injuries globally. So do we have enough education to do that? Are people actually being skilled to wear PPE, don and doff, particularly during the COVID pandemic? Do we have that capacity to train and educate? If there was another pandemic, do we know that? So this is basically what a system should have. Now, a system, again, should have its policies, procedures, its protocols, its standard operating procedures. And a system also, and we cover the system slightly, we go on to cover that, but a system should also try and understand what the process is of deploying PPE. Do we have the correct environment? Do we know if our surgical sites actually have PPE within easy reach, particularly if there's an escalation involved? And do we have the correct supplies, the volume of supplies, the speed of delivery, and all of that? I suppose, this is the time when we require, to be able to manage an escalation, if there ever was. No, in fact, I would say when it happens again, because it's not a matter of if, it's about when. It's really about, developing that situational awareness about the need for PPE, and what could happen without it. It's about, choosing the options wisely, purely because, there won't be an unlimited supply of PPE. There isn't at the moment. I suppose, some of you might be able to share if or not you do have enough supplies of gloves, for instance. You have enough supplies of gowns, for instance, in the surgical environment. And this is where I think social factors come into play, about good teamwork, about communication, not just, within your theatre, but also with the wider theatre teams, but also within your hospital, with your management and leadership teams, with your procurement teams. And for that, you need to have a culture, an open, transparent, fearless culture, a psychologically safe culture. That only comes from good leadership. So to me, what does good culture actually mean? It means, like I've touched upon before, psychological safety. And psychological safety is the ability to speak up without fear and recrimination. A shared belief held by members of a team, that is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Now we know social determinants are important. We know that there was disproportionate harm caused during the COVID pandemic to certain groups with protected characteristics, particularly people of minority ethnic background. The COVID inquiry is still on. So having a culture where you respect everyone, where you give people the freedom and the space to speak up, is absolutely important to be able to manage PPE in an equitable way. Touching upon, the subject of culture, I think it's important again that you understand the who element, as in who is responsible, is taken out. We've now got the patient safety incident response framework, where systems are looked at, where you have systems thinking at the very heart, and psychological safety. Something to give thought to is, again, NATCIPS 2, that is part of the Center of Perioperative Care, where perhaps the question to be asked when you're checking in for surgery during the team brief is whether we've got the appropriate PPE and if everybody fully understands the risk, especially so when procedures with high aerosol generation and infection are involved, or risk of infection are involved. One thing on reflection following the COVID-19 pandemic was, all of a sudden, PPE became the rage. PPE became the need for PPE became the norm. There was narrative around there wasn't enough PPE, but I think we need to spare some thought about procurement processes. Do we manufacture PPE in this country? Should we be manufacturing PPE in a particular country? I'm not in case we've got an international audience with us. We know fully well that, our supply chains are global. And during the pandemic, the supply chain actually was delayed or even seized because, shipping lines, planes, supplies, pretty much, were delayed or stopped in certain areas. Do we have storage capacity, both at the site of production, but also, you've got the distribution, you've got distribution from outside in, but also distribution within a particular area, region, or even within an organization? Do we use things wisely. We often don't give enough thought, do we? We just throw gloves. We use them, we tear them, we throw them, and then put on another set of gloves. We probably throw a lot of masks away. And that does actually cause a massive problem, because it is estimated that each mask, for example, has 3 grams of plastic. 18 million masks are produced everywhere, and each mask, on being disposed, causes 0.55 kilograms of carbon emission. Gloves are a great example. Again, 76 million gloves made out of synthetic products, nitrile and vinyl, which again are, carbon emitting products. During the COVID pandemic, it was estimated that landfill there was up to 6,800 tons of waste in landfill. There was 1.5 billion masks in marine debris. 25% of annual ocean waste is estimated to be from plastics generated from masks, and approximately 3 million tons of PPE is thrown into waste. So there's a massive environmental impact. And that's why I think it's important to choose wisely, to improve the equitability, to improve the variation in PPE, because, it's not an endless supply. Ed.
Hi, thanks, Ali. So we know there's a great demand for PPE within hospital setting or within healthcare. When we talk about PPE, we have to talk about ethical procurement. And nearly every country in the world is affected by modern slavery. Can you go next slide, please, Ali? So the link between PPE supply chains and hospitals in modern slavery has been a significant concern, particularly highlighted during the COVID-19 pandemic, when the global demand for protective equipment surged. Investigation revealed that troubling labour conditions in manufacturing hubs, especially in countries like Malaysia, which supplies a large proportion of disposable gloves and PPE. Next one, Ali, please. For example, forced labour and exploitations. Companies like Supermax and a major PPE supplier faced allegations of modern slavery, including forced labour, debt bondage, and long working hours under abusive conditions. Despite the bans in the US and Canada due to such practice, the UK government continued to contract with the companies during the pandemic, promoting a legal challenge over procurement ethics. The UK government spent over £300 million on gloves from Supermax during the pandemic, despite prior allegations of labour abuse. This led to action challenging the government compliance with anti-slavery procurement law. Next one, Ali.
So my thoughts are that we've got hundreds of people, hundreds and thousands, or even millions of people being affected by infection. And yet, I'm going to play this video. You will see that a team sport, a sport like Formula One, where the risk of harm is high to an individual, it's highly, highly safe. It doesn't happen. In the last 30 years, I can think of only 3 drivers have died. I'm using the word only 3, but I think, I'm not trying to play that down. And this is an incident from 1994 that shows that even in 1994, the PPE against fire risk was so good. But more importantly, I want to highlight how good the teamwork was in putting out the fire. Is this video playing? There you go. Now, unfortunately, it's not playing, but you'd have seen that, it literally took 2 minutes for the fire to be put out by the team. And in fact, the driver involved in that fire was or is the father of the current Formula One world champion, Max Verstappen. I mean, there'd be no Max Verstappen if this driver had died. But yet, there are hundreds of thousands, millions of people that are being harmed through surgery, and a proportion of them dying. They don't have any Max Verstappens, probably not. Okay, so I think, in conclusion, it's important to understand that PPE provides safety, improves well-being, potentially would improve retention. We do have a regulatory obligation, and it has a massive financial impact if we don't get PPE right. Like I've said to you, you're looking at the cost of infection, surgical site infection, managing surgical site infection, running into hundreds of millions in this country alone. We do need to have policy, and the question is, should we be that driver for policy? Now, how do we address the variability in PPE standards? At a national level, I suppose it's advocate group. Global level is the WHO that we require, or groups require to advocate. National level, there needs to be advocacy, but at a local level, it does take responsible leadership. It takes responsible leadership within organizations, but also at a ground level within teams to make sure that we use PPE wisely, appropriately, and have sufficient supply. Possibly having checklists to be certain that we're getting it right is important. Best practices around PPE usage. Yes, there is best practice through the National Infection and Infection Prevention Control Manual. We need to get the narrative correct to staff and patients about PPE. There needs to be that adherence to a policy or guidance and education. We need to have open, transparent, and non-hierarchical, inclusive, open culture-based leadership. I'd be very happy for us to take questions, but equally, I'd appreciate the opportunity if somebody did want to contribute to any questions, that they can put their hand up and we'll bring you in. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ali and Ed. I'll kick you off with a couple of reasonably practical questions. One here from Kirsten Simpson. FFP3 masks with valves do not protect the patient from air-transmitted pathogens. What do you recommend for staff to use in such situations?
Ed, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, the only protection we have in theatre, we have our three face covers. We have the helmets that we use in orthopedics, which again it has no microfilter which prevent pathogens. If we're talking about something's really communicable, it's almost like a nuclear, biological, chemical warfare enhancement. We don't have nothing like that in theatre. You'd hope that that's very few and far between that we face a patient with something that contagious, but that'd be almost like a hazmat situation.
Thank you, Ed. Another reasonably practical question here from Holly Taha. Please could you advise on how to encourage surgeons to wear masks during cataract surgery, or share any research or guidelines you may know that encourages this to be mandatory practice?
I can say within the trust that we work, it's within our policy that in theatre that all staff should wear masks, and that's for two reasons. Because even in cataract surgery, there's a body fluid moving around, or there's fluid moving around, so there is a risk of the surgeon being contaminated. But equally, the surgeon could also cough, sneeze, etc. So we got it written in our trust policy that everyone in theatre, even not at the table, has to wear a face mask.
Thank you, Ed. A question about technology here, and then I've seen Tom Jack has put his hand up. First on technology, how can emerging technologies such as smart PPE with integrated sensors enhance infection control in healthcare settings?
It's a very good question. I don't think I'm able to answer that, but I think if there is smart technology, it would be about calibrating the level of PP, maybe, but also the use, because we do live at this point in time with in an environmental crisis. I would say that it should be treated no less than the COVID-19 crisis. And perhaps smart technology might be able to regulate and regulate the supply, but also regulate the use more effectively. If
you, Ed.
anybody else is able to offer an opinion from the floor,
Yeah.
I'd be happy that they share it.
I'm going to unmute Tom Jack first, and then I saw Claire Bailey also put her hand up as well. Tom?
Hi there. Yeah, Tom Jakes. I'm the director of IPC at Imperial. A disclaimer: I don't work in theatres, but where I do get involved with PPE is often around compliance. It's often around teaching and training and supporting teams. I think you're right. It's difficult to not have a national steer. We've been doing quite a bit of work around theatre etiquette, which we've combined our sort of PPE training, what products are available. That's clearly shifted significantly over the COVID period. And I wonder, how much time do you spend talking about this as a group? And does everybody have an understanding of when and where they should be wearing it, why they should be wearing it, and do you have an overarching document that's almost, people can put their finger on, so you can talk about these issues, but also as a bit of a handrail where people are struggling with PPE. I know you're looking at this from a safety perspective, and absolutely, that is a key fundamental part of PPE. But that joined up understanding, that almost, teaching it, training to it, and having a culture of PPE use in your operating theatres is really something that takes quite a bit of work. And you're right, I don't think there is a huge national steer on this, which can be quite difficult. And all theatres are different, all organisations are different. So that's where we're going at the moment. We're trying to get this sort of, also those things, your scrubs are part of your PPE. We don't want you shedding into theatres. We want to protect the patients in that way. Do you do that? I get loads of noise around people from theatres wearing theatre hats outside of theatres. That sort of thing, that's all just noise. That can go away by really hammering down on theatre etiquette. So yeah, that's my view anyway. I don't have a view on smart technology, I'm afraid. I've not come across it.
And Tom, thank you so much. I tried to look up NICE and I couldn't find any guidance on PP. And perhaps, it might be good advocacy to get to NICE first, because NICE do take questions to put out guidances.
Can I just say, where we work, we have theatre SOPs, what clearly defines what we've set our own standards, what we wear in theatre and when we don't wear it. One of the problems we have faced, and which we now audit weekly, is the overuse of gloves. So we find that people wear gloves. We've gone from COVID, where you wore gloves for every reason, to now we don't need to wear gloves as often unless you're coming into contact with a patient. And the patient, the guidance that we use, which is infection control, even if you're touching a patient, as long as there's no bodily fluid or risk, then you don't wear gloves. So we have to now audit to try and get back to zero or pre-COVID working conditions. But we have an SOP. We have a theatre SOP, which is quite a big manual that we created about 5 years ago, which we're in the process of updated, which dictates what we wear when, and that covers theatre etiquette as well. From entering to what to wear to when to wear it. So that's what we do in our trust.
Thank you, Ed, and thank you, Tom, for the question. Claire, I see you've got a hand up, so I'll let you ask your question, and then I've got some more in the chat, and we will go until 1 p.m. Thanks, Claire. If you're there, Claire, if you could unmute.
Oh, there we go. So my name's Claire Bailey. I'm from the Health and Safety Executive. And I should preface this with, I am not a medic and I have no operating surgical experience at all. However, I am a microbiologist, and I do I've worked very closely with the HCID, High Consequence Infectious Disease Network, to design and develop a unified ensemble for them to wear that would cover them from both the respiratory to contact virus infections. And what I wanted to say was they've made great strides as a network in developing a PPE, developing the SOPs for dealing with patients, and including how to wear the PPE, when to wear it, and how to take it off safely. And I wonder if that sort of strategy would be something that would help you lot in having more of a uniformed voice, really, because one thing that they have managed to do is get PPE into NHS supplies that is actually fit for purpose for their needs.
Ali or Ed?
I mean, as for our standard PPE, Don and a Doffin, and that's what we call it, Don and a Doffin. We have a set protocol for that. It's again the bit I was probably most interested in is when you have highly contagious patients, because we don't have many protocols for anybody who's high risk patients. The standard what we call high risk is the hepatitis HIVs, which is a risk. But anything more contagious than that, I mean, I don't know if they go to a centre like in London, but we had
there is a network throughout the UK, and it would depend on where you're based as to where it is. But it's just something to think about. I think they found that having individuals from trusts across the country, across the whole of the UK, gave them a unified voice, gave them a lot more power, and it's allowed them to get PPE into the NHS supply chain that they previously couldn't. And also you've got the added advantage because they've set up a training program now with the donning and the doffing, and that's allowed people from different trusts to work to move trusts easily, so that if there was a large scale outbreak, or you suddenly found you needed a huge number of people, say in East Kent, down with you guys, you could pull in people from Newcastle, you could pull in people from Lincoln, you could pull in, and you wouldn't need to go through as much of the training process as you would do at the moment with all the different operating procedures. It was just something to think about.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. I have another question here from excuse me, from Lindsay Keeley. She first makes a comment that employers have a legal duty of care to provide appropriate PPE and provide education. They also need to audit and check compliance. Employees are required to follow organisational policy following this. But Lindsay also makes the point that when auditing organisations, she sees people wearing inappropriate PPE. When asking them why, they say the organisation's gone back to pre-COVID practice and supplies. They're told it's too expensive to provide FFP3 masks, and theatre etiquette is not what it used to be in theatres, and standards are not reinforced. I know we were talking about pre-COVID and post-COVID, Ali, in the organisation of this webinar, and it seems to be a topic that continues to come up regarding PPE.
So, I mean, regarding theatre discipline, I think where should theatre discipline start is the question. Should it actually start in the operating room, or should it even be before? And that's a topic of huge discussion, I suppose, in a lot of organizations, because it still appears that there's a lot of variation in the discipline of people flow within the entire theatre suite. You've got some organizations where it's absolutely mandatory that scrub wear should only be used in theatre, and outside, theatre, you take your scrubs, you put on normal clothing and you go out and you change back into your scrubs when you're in. And yet there seems to be a lot of variation. Some organizations, people can just walk in to the anesthetic room in normal shoes and normal scrubs. So if you're talking about discipline, I think discipline really starts at the front door of a theatre suite. Within theatres, of course, there's still variability. For orthopedic procedures, yes, there is a fairly set standard. But I can tell you for sure that exhaust suits haven't been mandated. Exhaust suits are still a choice that an organization takes because there's a cost implication. But there still appears to be variability between different types of procedures. So certain general surgical procedures, people will argue that you don't need a face mask because, they're highly contaminated fields anyway. Some procedures like laparoscopy, there may be an argument that people will make about not using a mask. So there's a lot of variation, and that's where I think, we need to have national policy, strong national policy that sets the standard of what should be use. And I think, NICE would be a good place to start that. And I know that, health technology agencies such as NICE and in Scotland, Scottish Health Technology Group do take questions or requests to be able to sort of flesh out guidelines. I don't know if I answered that particular question.
Thank you, Ali. If Lindsay wants to speak, I can just raise your hand and you can return. If not, I have another question. Oh, there's Lindsay.
Sorry, excuse me. Ed, do you have any thoughts on the variability of theatre discipline?
I was listening to what you said on the question of Lindsay, and yes, we're trying to move back to pre-pandemic. We definitely, again, I can only speak for East Kent. We don't have an issue in providing PPE. We're quite strict on PPE wearing, but and that starts from us from day one when you turn up for training and induction, but then it's definitely down to maintain those disciplines down to individual teams. But that's a whole team. So within that team, you have the surgeon, the scrub team, the anaesthetic team. So the team must be self-disciplined or self-governing, because we do audit it, but it's normally behind a closed door, and you need to rely on the team to maintain those standards. I don't know if that helps, Lindsay.
Hi, yeah. Obviously, when you go around, it's all about theatre etiquette, and theatre etiquette over the years, and I've been in theatre 38 years now, it's not what it used to be, and people aren't reinforcing it. So as much as you go around and do an observational audit, it's then doing that and also educating, then reinforcing it. And equally, it could come to a point of actually disciplining people against it if it's in a policy. But you need to educate and everything around that. But it's also strong leadership. It's like you were talking about. It's to do with human factors and culture. It's not just one thing, but if it's a constant process, and you find that as soon as you take the foot off the pedal, that's when it slips and it goes back to what it used to be. And that's what you see. So unless you've got that there, strong culture, the leadership, everything else in place, then it is going to slip and we're not going to be where we need to be. And this is where we see it happening. And it's both across the NHS and the independent sector. I've had people pulling off the visor off a mask because they don't like it, but they like the colour purple because it suits their complexion or their hair colour or their makeup. They have no idea what the masks are actually used for and what procedure they should use them for. Obviously, some people are fit tested as well, and then you come into scrub rooms where there's like 10 boxes of different types of masks because they just keep accumulating. It's like the breeding and nobody's doing anything about it. So it's almost like you need somebody just to go around and constantly reinforce that. And we don't have the staff to do that. I don't think there's many health and safety reps in theatres now. It just depends on your organisation. It's not like it used to be. So it's constantly somebody going around. Infection prevention and control leads for the hospitals, rarely going to theatres. There's not always an infection prevention and control lead within the theatre as well. And then it's the team leader of that theatre to just do an observation themselves. Like if you see somebody wearing the wrong theatre suit, or it's too long on their feet, or the hair's coming out of the hat, people just seem to ignore it and just continue doing what they're doing. And I think it's about all of us taking responsibility and accountability with that on top of everything else that we discussed so far.
I think you're completely right, Lindsay. There's definitely been a shift in culture in the last 10 years. And I think that's a shift in society as well, as the way society is. You know, people don't like to challenge, people don't like confrontation. And we've moved away from that old school of challenging with outcome. And I think if there's no outcome for breaking the rules, then we don't have rules. So I'm an ex-military man. So in my theatres, there's outcome.
Yes.
And that maintain standards. And that's the only way we can do it. And you're right. And I say to my team, I can't be in every theatre every day. I've got 17 theatres. But I make it aware to my junior leaders and my senior team that should I walk in a theatre and the rules not being followed, there'd be more than one person in my office. And it'd be the team leader for not upholding the rules and the person who's broken the rules. And that's not a rule of fear. That's just a rule of accountability. You know, that we pay these people higher rates of money to take on that responsibility. So you're right, that's the only way that I can maintain that the standards are met, because there is an outcome for not following the rules. But you're right, there's education before that, and we don't go in there strict. We know there's always been education and, you know, second chances. But there comes a point where you stop the chances and you start putting it in writing.
Yeah, another reflection from me, Lindsay, and I suppose excellent, well said, Ed. I think, Lindsay, another reflection from me is the quality. I wonder what, you know, our group thinks about the quality of masks. I've certainly felt, I don't know if it actually is correct, but I felt a decline in the quality of masks. So, you know, previously, and again, before the sort of, you know, consciousness that a face mask had to be a single-use product where you actually changed your face mask between surgeries. Previously, I mean, traditionally, you wear the same face mask all day, to using it now as a single-use product for individual operations. I have found that, you know, the old face masks that used to tie behind you have now increasingly been replaced by the ones with the elastic bands, and they tend to fray a lot easily. They break a lot easily. The plastic seems to rub against you, especially if you've got a slight stubble, and they don't seem to have the same quality. And are we giving thought? That's the question. Are we giving thought to the quality of PP that's coming through just because there's such an exponential demand? And the PP is probably not being measured against any particular standards. You know, we used to have the CE mark previously. So do we have that sort of quality assurance?
Yeah, on the response to that regarding the maths, I did quite a bit of work on this because as COVID hit, I was inundated, which I knew I would be, regarding PPE, infection prevention and control, because we're not where we needed to be before COVID, which is why we ended up in a lot of the issues that we did. But particularly about the masks, it's the history of the mask is that in the UK, in majority of places, they used to wear the tie masks. And the reason was because the looped masks were removed with the elastic, because when you speak during the procedure, your mask was falling off your face. So this is why the UK didn't have them. And obviously we had other variations of how people tightened them around the head during COVID with various different devices. But it seems to be that there's not many of the tie masks there, and there was a reason for that, because if you tie it correctly, it won't slip off your face. If you pinch it where it needs to be and it's fitted according to what you need or whatever procedure you're doing, it shouldn't fall off your face. But if you take a look round, and I've seen it on various different organizations, these ones with the elastic on, they fall off your face. So they're not fit for purpose. So to me, I would be doing a risk assessment, providing information on the gap, and any information there is on the mask, and saying, right, these are not appropriate and therefore they need to be removed. But there is a cost implication and a procurement issue as well that we know about. And equally, as an organisation, if these items are on the procurement, are in the procurement catalogue, as an organisation, you don't have to order specific ones. You can choose whichever one you order as long as it's on catalogue. So there's nobody forcing you to order the correct one.
Yeah,
And that's
it's
the other
important.
thing.
Yeah, I'm glad you made the point about procurement, because again, procurement, one has to understand different organizations have different procurement models. Some are on site, some belong to the organization, some are off site, some are on site and don't belong to the organization, and some are off site and don't belong to the organization. So, you know, procurement processes themselves can be fairly lengthy, involving the decision making and the contract and the communication about quality, etc. So it's again something that, you know, one needs to keep in mind. It's a challenge.
And it's still going on, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. There was also Kirsten had her hand up to speak. If not, there's Tom's got his hand up, and Claire as well. They're all unmuted. We have 4 minutes.
Thanks. Just a point on, is there a standard? There is absolutely a standard for surgical masks. So it's EN 14683, which has been hammered home through COVID. But you've got to remember, with surgical masks, there's different types of surgical masks, right? There's type 1, there's type 2, and then there's type 2R. So IIRs are the ones that we should be using in the operating theatre, and those are tested in terms of water, their sort of resistance to water, splashes, and also breathability. So procurement should only be bringing in masks that are at the correct EN standard and that are type 2R for the operating theatre. I have noticed when I've gone around some of our operating theatre complexes that type 2 masks are being used. It's really important that those boxes are checked and they say IIR on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And then we've got Claire and then Rosella, and then I think that'll be our time. Claire? You just need to click unmute. Thanks.
It's just a quick point on the masks. I suppose it depends on what you're actually wearing the mask for. If it is just for splash protection, the fact that it slips slightly is irritating, but it won't stop. Its performance won't dip too much. If it's for an aerosol challenge, HSE really recommends that people have a true fit test for that mask, and that mask is individual specific, and they do not wear anything other than the mask that they are fit tested for. And it is quite, if you give people a choice and they pick, a fit tested mask is uncomfortable to wear because it needs to create a seal on the face, and if you give people a choice, they tend not to want to wear the fit testing mask, whereas a traditional surgical mask is splash protection only. So it really does depend on what you are protecting yourself from, whether it's a splash or an aerosol.
Thank you, Claire. And Rosella, we've got 2 minutes if you'd like to finish this off.
I'll talk as quickly as I can. My name is Rosalie. I'm the Health and Safety Business Partner over at the Royal Infirmary of Edinburgh and the Royal Hospital for Children and Young People. I was just wanting to seek your thoughts on, I know that the AFPP have issued a bit of guidance quite recently suggesting that FFP3 respirators or equivalent should be used for where all thermal energy devices are used within theatres, which is obviously the vast majority, to control the risk of exposure to surgical smoke plumes. I know that there's been a bit of research that's been published suggesting that it can be the equivalent to being exposed to 20 to 30 cigarettes a day for theatre staff. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on this, because there's very, very limited national level guidance other than this recommendation from the AFPP.
In our trust, all our diaphragms have smoke evacuators, so has a filter. So we have very limited smoke within the surgical area. I mean, I don't know if that helps. We don't wear FFP for using diaphragm or for smoke, but yeah, we tend to have smoke evacuation. The only, obviously, in urology, it doesn't work all the time because we are working within the bladder, but the smoke still is evacuated eventually. But yeah, we tend to use smoke evacuation systems.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And just to let everyone know, we are planning to do another 2 webinars in the new year on theatre safety. One of those will be looking at surgical smoke, Rose, so I'll make sure that you're there for that one. The other one is likely to be looking at waste disposal, but a lot of the similar themes. And just to end on a point to say that we have our Safety for All conference on Tuesday next week. I've put a link in the chat. I know that many people on this call will be there. Looking forward to seeing you all there. If you have any further questions, I'll put my email address in the chat. Otherwise, thank you so much to Ali and to Ed for your time, and thank you all for joining this Safety for All webinar. Thanks very much.